175 years ago, the Industrial Revolution was driving social and economic change throughout Europe and Britain. By comparison, the heartland of Ireland was in the Dark Ages. But then we began to build railways. Within a few decades, the countryside was transformed by a network that spread out across the land. Building railway infrastructure, like this tunnel, in the middle of the 19th century posed major engineering challenges, both for those who were designing it and the builders who constructed it. It is one of the great achievements and adventures of building Ireland. In this series, our team, an architect, an engineer and a geographer, is exploring some of the finest examples of Ireland's building and engineering heritage. And this time, we're retracing the story of the building of the Cork and Bandon South Coast Railway. When it came to building railways, Irish engineers and construction workers were up there with the best. The Cork and Bandon Railway was one of the most important in the country, as it was an early line into rural Ireland and one of the most complex to build. It's an amazing story, full of problems, ingenious solutions and controversy. Architect Orla Murphy rediscovers one of Ireland's biggest industrial sites, whose products helped carve open the land.
It's hard to imagine, but this site was once an industrial concern of international importance. To work here, you were taking your life in your hands. This is the story of the Royal Gunpowder Mills in Ballincollig.
And geographer Susan Hegarty is exploring a part of Cork City where country came to town and beef and dairy produce became a thriving industry.
The geography of Shandon is to this day a unique honeycomb of narrow little streets where blood and butter once flowed freely.
In the middle of the 19th century, railway mania was gripping Europe, and Ireland was no different. Irish engineers Patrick Leahy and his son Edmund were proposing hundreds of kilometres of rail projects in the Munster region. At a meeting in the Devonshire Arms Hotel, Bandon, on September the 28th, 1844, they laid out their plans for a line into West Cork to private investors and the local landed gentry. The Cork, Bandon and South Coast Railway had begun. Construction began midway between Cork and Bandon here in Ballinhassig. It didn't start well. There were allegations of materials going missing and question marks over the gradient and route of the line. Consulting engineer Charles Blacker-Vignoles was drafted in and some engineers were fired, with Edmund Leahy fighting to stay on the project. Cork City is that way, but there were two massive natural features obstructing the line: the Lawn Valley and Goggin's Hill. The valley would need a viaduct, but Leahy, being an enthusiastic young engineer, was determined to cut a tunnel through that rocky hill. There was only one way to do it. They would have to blast their way through. The tunnel at Goggin's Hill was to be the longest railway tunnel in the country, about 1 kilometre long, making this an epic engineering project of the Victorian Railway age. In the days before drill bits and tunnelling machines, breaking through rock required explosions. Lots of explosions. But first, the engineers needed to know where they were going. It's quite a feat to cut a curved tunnel more than 1 kilometre through a hill and have it come out exactly where you want it to. At the time, they didn't have engineering plans, but they did have maps. I'm meeting survey engineer Barry O'Keefe to find out how they put it all together. Barry, back in the 1840s, how would they have helped the diggers construct this tunnel?
Well, using the detailed maps that existed, the designers would have sketched the proposed route of the railway. It was then the surveyor's job to go and determine where the tunnel is supposed to be. And once they had done that, they built a series of shafts. These shafts are evident here now, as they later became ventilation shafts for the railway. They did a series of these across the hill. Then, with the surveyor inside the shaft, he could then determine the angle at which the blasting needs to begin.
6 shafts were sunk into the hill, and teams of workers started tunnelling towards each other at their base. The surveyors checked the progress, continually making slight adjustments to the direction of the curved line of the tunnel.
The one thing I will say, they had time on their side, because if they were blasting only at a rate of 1 yard per week, there was a whole lot of time to recheck their observations and double check them. So while it was challenging, time was on their side to get it absolutely right.
Two shifts worked by 300 men each dug through day and night using hand pick and shovel, clearing away shattered rock and debris deep within Goggin's Hill. Progress was painfully slow and was ultimately dependent on one crucial substance. Gunpowder was the magic ingredient. Earth and rock could be shifted on a scale simply not possible before now. The working conditions, long hours, underground, in the dark and dampness, were awful. This is before anybody heard of health and safety. The working environment in the 19th century was a dangerous place, as Orla is discovering in a public park outside Cork City.
It's hard to imagine, but this site was once an industrial concern of international importance. Its produce was used to wage wars and to help build the railways. But the workers here would have their clothes, their shoes, and even under their collars searched. They were taking their life in their hands every day. This is the story of the Royal Gunpowder Mills in Ballincollig.
At the start of the 19th century, the Napoleonic Wars were raging throughout Europe, and the British Admiralty had a serious appetite for gunpowder. The Royal Gunpowder Mills were established on a flat and isolated site beside the River Lee, and because the site was near the second largest natural harbour in the world, gunpowder could be exported all over the empire. Gunpowder manufacture was based on the grinding together of saltpetre, sulphur and charcoal under millstones. The ruins of industrial buildings are dotted all over the site, from press houses for compressing the volatile powders to drying houses for removing moisture. Every stage was fraught with danger.
This whole site is a vast assembly line of 60 buildings spread over 430 acres. The architecture and design of this landscape is about function, process, and above all, safety. One spark could ignite the whole site. So how do you prevent a chain reaction explosion?
Local historian Jenny Webb knows this site well and its extensive network of canals. Essential for the safe and smooth transport of powders, these canals also had another purpose.
So the Royal Gunpowder Mills here in Ballincollig, what powered them?
It was water power, Orla. We're talking about the days before steam power. Behind this wall is the River Lee. So all gunpowder mills had to be situated on a river. So you had to have a canal system to power all the different buildings.
Can you tell us about the architecture or the structures that are in front of us?
Yes, these are called blast walls. You see, the mills were set in pairs, and between each pair were these high blast walls. Now, this meant that if there was an explosion in one of the mills, it wouldn't impact on the mills next to it. Basically, you didn't want a chain reaction. Even a bit of grit could actually rub against the powder and cause an explosion. You had to wear special clothes with no turn-ups or any collars. You wore special overshoes. When you left, you had to bathe to make sure there was no gunpowder on your body that you brought home.
The Royal Gunpowder Mills was a vast military industrial operation. Security was a serious issue, and the 500 workers were searched entering and leaving every day. But Irish Fenians and would-be rebels weren't the primary concern.
On November the 3rd, 1810, a violent explosion rocked the St. Finbarr's area of Cork City, demolishing 3 houses. 22 people were killed.
The Cork Mercantile Chronicle of November the 5th describes the scene. A worker had found a ready market for the powder in the quarries near the city, and each evening he brought small quantities back to his home in Brandy Lane. Carelessness while drying the powder with candles was supposed to have been the cause of the explosion.
The milling of gunpowder from raw materials into a fine powder took careful attention to detail, exacting standards, and some might say nerves of steel for the workers. I'm going to get very close to this raw material with some expert help.
Colm Doyle is a licensed expert in early firearms, and today he's brought some gunpowder back into the mills.
You're going to show me some gunpowder, Colm.
I am a DJ, so I'll show you the idea of the gunpowder being compressed and how it actually operates inside a firearm. Now, Arla, I have to know, just pull the trigger.
Some dramatic shock. I got quite a bit of fright, actually. The sound and the smell are something else.
Yeah, that'll be sulphurs that make up gunpowder.
And so this gunpowder was used for blasting. Is it the same principle?
So basically, you got the same gunpowder, but it's pressed in tight. So when you light it, it burns very fast and gives you an explosion effect. So basically, you'd have 2 or 3 guys who are in charge of demolition. They'll pack up in small charges, light it, and they'll hope they have enough, or sometimes they had too much. But either way, they got a hole in the wall. We'll just give you a demonstration now. I'm going to show you how quick gunpowder actually burns.
OK. The heat, and it's gone in an instant.
Yeah, it disappears straight away.
Left at all.
It's
the nature of the materials.
Yeah, it's the nature of the gunpowder itself, the fact that it's fairly unstable.
It's so volatile, which just shows you how...
Extremely volatile.
How
see, the match just touched it and it was gone.
By the time it closed in 1890, the Ballincollig mills had produced over 2 million barrels of gunpowder, and it helped to fuel 19th century expansion in road building and rail tunnelling.
Construction on the Cork and Bandon Railway continued apace. As work on the tunnel at Goggin's Hill got underway, another engineering challenge was presenting itself a couple of miles to the east, at the Lawn Valley. A short, mile-long stretch of track would require one of the most dramatic and structurally demanding rail viaducts ever attempted in Ireland. The location of the viaduct had to provide a direct route to Cork and solid foundations. The site chosen right here is 30 metres high and 180 metres wide from abutment to abutment.
Discover the past with exclusive history documentaries from History Hit and uncover the secrets of some of the most famous people and events in history. History Hit gives you access to a growing range of documentaries presented by and featuring historians at the forefront of research and debate. Whether you are looking to find out more about charismatic leaders like Cleopatra or to discover the story behind the Industrial Revolution, History Hit will have something for you. We also aim to bring you the stories and legends that shaped our world through our award-winning podcast network. Sign up now for a free trial, and Absolute History fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code AbsoluteHistory at checkout.
Opinions varied on the best engineering option. The principal engineers, the Leahys, and expert railway consultant Blacker Vignoles agreed on the construction of a timber viaduct, but they disagreed on the type of wood to be used. Accusations emerged that Leahy and his son Edmund were conspiring with timber suppliers, and tensions were heightened over poor quality stonework on the foundations. This controversy over the materials to be used for this deck and on the poor workmanship of the pier and the abutments led to the railway engineers, the Leahys, being fired. I wanted to find out more about why this project was getting into such difficulties, so I went to meet Dr. Colin Wren, an industrial archaeologist who's researched the history of Cork's railways.
The thing about the Leahys in general is that they rather disgracefully put their private interests above the interests of their client. I mean, they are public employees, they're employed as county surveyors. And at the same time, they're promoting 2 other projects. They have too many fingers in other pies. And that, in essence, is why this project breaks down.
With both Leahys, father and son now dismissed, Charles Nixon, an apprentice to the famed engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, was appointed to the project. The construction of the viaduct was now going to be in iron, and iron would require a monumental engineering effort. Railways were connecting rural and urban Ireland. Susan is on the north side of Cork City looking at the beef and butter trade, which had a world-famous reputation during the 18th and 19th centuries.
The rich agricultural hinterland of North Cork and Kerry meant that the city was for centuries a key hub for food processing. These products have left a lasting impression on the streetscape of this part of Cork. In 1800, Cork was the most important transatlantic shipping port in the world, and it was experiencing a real boom. Conflict between Britain and France meant that the British Empire relied hugely on Irish agricultural produce. Railways were attracting new investment so they could supply and feed the British mainland. This area had a world-famous reputation for beef and butter in the 19th century. The warren of narrow side streets and laneways tells us a story of urban migration and food processing right here in the shambles of Shandon. Cork possessed the largest shambles, or open-air butcheries, in Ireland. The geography of Shandon, with steep hills sloping down to the River Lee, meant, with a bit of luck, blood and animal effluent would be washed away down the hill. I met local historian Kieran McCarthy to learn more about this area's urban landscape. This area has a unique layout. Can you describe it a bit for me?
There was a very famous writer about 90 years ago, a man called Daniel Corkery, and he described the architecture of the city as higgledy-piggledy. So when you're trying to piece Shandon together, you'll see loads of laneways, kind of loads of narrow streets, loads of kind of buildings with different heights, different colours.
And why do you have all these narrow streets?
Basically because of its history. I mean, at one stage there was an enormous kind of shambles here, a butchery, where 90,000 cattle per annum were slaughtered on one side of Shandon Street. On this side of Shandon Street, the bones of 100,000 barrels were exported from here. And so people flocked into these areas trying to get work, and people live nearby. I mean, the population of Cork in 1750 was 75,000 people. 50 years previously, it was 20,000 people. So 20,000 to 75,000. The population is tripling.
What we're doing now is we're making butter.
Beef was being produced on an industrial scale in Shandon, but so too was butter. 200 years ago, Cork was at the centre of a global butter exchange, and from here it was traded as a commodity of significant value. Peter Foynes is the director of the Cork Butter Museum. So as a geographer, I'm interested to know, why so much agricultural trade here in Shandon?
Food tends to be processed on this side of the island. And that's Shandon, basically. If you look at the maps of Cork in the 18th century, it is in this side of the city where the huge growth occurs in the course of the emergence of the food trade in beef and butter. In fact, the butter market in Cork was the largest butter market in the world in its time. At its peak, there were 50 different butter merchants around this area, and then you had 400,000 firkins of butter coming through. It was then rapidly exported, so the road down here takes you pretty much onto the quays, and onto the quays, into the ships, and off it went.
The attraction of Cork's butter was its long shelf life, preserved through a secret pickling agent and lots of salt.
See what colour it is?
Gone yellow. Professional inspectors were pioneering quality control in food processing, and the butter was stamped with an internationally recognised symbol of guaranteed quality. So how far did this Cork butter travel?
Cork butter had a global reach. I mean, it's said also that because Cork butter followed the British Empire, you would find Cork butter in the Crimean War, in Turkey, in India. The New York trader refers to Cork butter as butter that he keeps for his friends only, because it's high status.
The demand during the early 19th century for fresh butter was the start of the decline for the Cork Butter Exchange. Railways were going to speed up the transport of fresh produce to market, and many Victorian speculators believed there would be an expansion in agri-food trade, and they rushed to profit. The agri-food sector was booming in the Munster region, and the new railway brought even bigger and better business. But the ultimate irony was that the building of the Cork and Bandon Railway coincided with the most tragic event of the century, the Great Famine. Beef and butter continued to be exported out of Cork, while the country starved.
By June 1849, the Cork to Bandon Railway project was in trouble. Its principal engineers had been sacked, and Charles Nixon was now in charge. There were only 5 miles of railway into Cork City left to complete, but the Lawn Valley had yet to be crossed. Cast iron was the best available metal option in the construction of bridges. It was strong, and it could be bolted together into lightweight frames. This viaduct required iron frames to span 110 feet on piers that were 70 feet high, and each span consists of 4 arched ribs. Large crowds gathered to watch the massive ribs being lifted into place. The scale of the infrastructure works required on this line was enormous and very expensive. So I asked Dr. Colin Wren if they were over-engineering the project. Was there an easier way to build this line?
In today's terms, there is. But if you think of the locomotives that are available then, really their tractive power, the pulling power they have is considerably less of locomotives which come 10 years later, which really can make the most of any type of gradient. And in a sense, it goes back to the question, was it over-engineered? In terms of the locomotives that they had, it most certainly wasn't. So really, there isn't a choice there.
On the 30th of June 1849, a trial trip was made between Ballinhassig and Bandon, with Nixon driving the engine. The whole trip just took 18 minutes. Even though it was unfinished, the decision was made to commercially open the first stretch of this new line just 5 weeks later, on the 1st of August. The line wasn't yet ready for full locomotive traffic, so horse-drawn carriages ferried passengers back and forth. Many Cork people took the trip to marvel at the engineering achievements of the line and the magnificent views. But the contractors on site knew that the costs had spiralled and that the line's private investors were running out of money. They were owed £30,000 for their work, almost €3 million in today's money. The night before a planned excursion along the line for investors, Charles Ronayne, one of the company directors, took an engine out from Cork on a final trip. But some of the contractors were waiting and blocked the line with ballast wagons. They were determined to sabotage the project until they were paid and prevent Ronayne getting back to Cork. On reaching Black Ash Bridge, they stopped on the line and removed some sleepers. The driver of the returning engine spotted the obstruction just in time and brought it to a halt. Ronayne and his men managed to propel the ballast wagons back into Cork, but the contractors proceeded along the track, dynamiting 2 cuttings and blocking the line with tons of stone and spoil. And the grand opening was delayed for 4 months, until December 1851. On the opening day, the 250 guests had to endure torrential rain. It was so bad the train had to be divided here at Chetwynd. The first 2 carriages were moved on to Ballinhassig, and only then could the engine come back for the remaining passengers. The railway did not open with the blaze of glory that was expected. The coming of the railways changed Cork and changed Ireland. What used to take days now took hours, and an era of modernity and technological development brought radical changes to town and country. Over a 7-year period, in the middle of the 19th century, through the darkest days of the famine, 2 of the biggest civil engineering projects in the country had been completed, just 3 miles apart. As an engineer, I see this tunnel and viaduct as being wonderful achievements. What does this period of railway building represent?
It represents probably the most exciting crepuscular period in the technological development of this island. I mean, this is the equivalent of people in the 1840s and 1850s of going to the moon.
The Cork, Bandon and South Coast Railway was finally completed on May 2nd, 1893, when the line extended from Albert Quay in Cork City all the way to the pier at Baltimore. Passenger numbers on the line were always high, but the debts the railway accrued through expensive engineering works and the coming of motorised transport contributed to its eventual decline. The line closed on April 1st, 1961. The ingenuity and labour that helped bore a curved tunnel and raise a towering viaduct are a testament to the engineering ambition and the driving force of private capital that lay at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. The Cork and Bandon Railway helped develop a city and this region, and its legacy still echoes with us today.